energy. And I don't think we can afford to keep falling behind in how we are competitively ranked in infrastructure. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Sarah, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mary. You really raised a lot of the challenges that we all face. And I remember a couple of years ago when I spoke at Iowa State and how many of the students go home on weekends to help on their family farms and don't have broadband. And it's really a huge challenge that's been heightened in our awareness because of all the COVID restrictions as well. So thanks for underscoring all those different issues that we need to address to really make trade moving forward in this country. So our next panelist is Brent Shanks, and he's going to provide a perspective from Iowa State.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And I particularly appreciate the opportunity for NACM Edition to crash this very illustrious panel. So thank you for that opportunity. I'd like to talk about really value-added products and the opportunities, and certainly non-food value-added products from agricultural feedstocks is not remotely a new concept. What I would say is new is we have a lot of emerging innovation in biotechnology. Consumer expectations are increasing. Environmental concerns are increasing. So we're entering a new phase of interest in bio-based products. And I think of when we think of policies in bio-based products, I think we need to think of kind of two buckets of types of products that we have. One are products that are essentially the same as already produced by petrochemicals, but using a plant-based feedstock for them instead. So an example of that is the plant bottle from Coca-Cola, where about a third of the content of that plastic is plant-based. The remainder is petrochemical, but it replaced a product that was completely petrochemical based. The good news of that type of product is the market is already in place, and so you're not having to do a lot of market development. The downside of that material is the price point of any products in there are absolutely set by petrochemical prices. The second area, which I think is getting more and more attention, is products with improved performance made available by plant feedstocks as the basis for the products. And in this case, going back to the plastic bottle again, there's work going on where to replace all of that plastic in the bottle with a new type of plastic that is completely plant-based that actually has improved properties for the bottle. The good news of that is you start to decouple a bit the price point from petrochemicals, but the bad news is there's a supply chain lead time into that as well as market that have to be addressed. The other beauty of bio-based products is there's just a broad range of opportunities. Just some examples they're working at in our center are novel plastics, improved lubricants, preservatives that can replace parabens, corrosion inhibitors, new insecticides. There's just a broad range of materials or of possibilities. And in fact, this is borne out that there's really been, I would say, increased interest in bioproducts across the industry and many players in the industry. A great exemplar of that, of course, is the formation of the Plant Bio-Based Product Consortium to help advocate for that. There's also a lot of state interest in these. And importantly, a lot of federal agencies. Clearly, USDA's always had an important role in this, but what we're starting to see is the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense starting to see the importance of bio-based products in their portfolio, and particularly in the case of Department of Defense for products with novel performance properties. With all that interest, I'm pleased to report there's actually quite a number of early stage products already in the pipeline that have been identified at lab scale or slightly larger than that. The challenge with that is to take them from that scale to the commercial scale. And to get from one to the other, you have to go through the scale up. And the scale up says I have to produce enough of this material that we can have extended testing, but also to prove out the technology at more like commercial scale. And good news along that lines is the Department of Defense has actually seen the importance of that, and they are planning to stand up a Bioindustrial Manufacturing Innovation Institute, and that should start as of October 1st of this year. And that's a $87.5 million investment by the Department of Defense over the next 6 years with dollar for dollar match from industry and state stakeholders. But it is absolutely directed towards how to speed up the commercialization of products, as well as to lower the price of getting from that bench scale up to the commercial scale. And I'll just finish with saying there are some policies already in the books that I think have been important for bio-based products. In the latest, in the 2018 Farm Bill, the USDA's BioPreferred program was reauthorized. This is a tremendously important way for products to be branded as BioPreferred, as well as to give preferential purchasing in the government for those types of products. And on a more local level in Iowa in 2017 enacted a renewables chemical production tax credit, which provides some incentive to produce renewable chemicals. So the message I have is new products have great potential. We certainly have a bit of a runway to get them off the ground. I think there is definitely scope for policy to help us move these along more rapidly, but there are encouraging signs of public-partner partnerships to really move this forward. And so with that, we'll send it back to Sarah, and thank you for the time.
Thank you, Brent. And it's good to know that our Department of Defense is actively exploring those things. As we all understand, there is a crucial linkage between food security and national security in this country on so many different levels. I'm going to take the prerogative of moderator and ask a couple of the first questions, and we'll turn over to the audience. Mary, I'd like to start with you and just talk to us a little bit about, as someone who has responsibilities for employees and economic development in the state of Iowa and globally, how has the trade front impacted your business in 2020? And how much do you think it could be improved if we could see full implementation of things like phase one?
Yeah, definitely. At a few years back, about 30% of the equipment that we produced in Pella was exported, and now we're down to like 20. So, I mean, it's been impacted. And definitely, as I mentioned before, bottom line has as well. I don't know that, you know, I did think the USMCA is probably more important for us from a trade standpoint on machinery than China is. But again, for us, to be honest with you, and we don't hear much about this, but some of our major tariff issues, again, were with the EU, more so almost than China. So I think just continuing the breadth, you know, one of the things that I'm hoping that we continue to look at is, you know, what are the countries that tend to work with the U.S. well, and like Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, and actually India and Brazil, so that there's a bit of a hedge maybe against some of the Chinese collaborative efforts that they're trying to do. And I really hope that we can continue to open up better trade relationships with many of those countries that we actually are more in tune with.
Thank you. You know, one of the things that we reported on yesterday is that Secretary Perdue seemed to be pushing back a little bit against the European Union because of the new farm program platforms that they are rolling out. Jim and Kevin, you both mentioned sustainability. Others have mentioned the environmental improvements that we've made in U.S. agriculture. Jim, we'll start with you. Could you just talk a little bit about both in South America with Brazil being able to bring a lot more of the rainforest acreage online, and in the European Union where they're looking at what their definition of sustainability is? How do you see U.S. farmers being able to compete going forward on the trade front, given these other influences in those regions?
Well, thank you, Sarah, for that question. And I think it's truly a competitive advantage that U.S. farmers have. As I mentioned in my opening comments, I mean, the farmers nurture their land, and we have a great sustainability message to be able to talk about internationally. We've been actively working in the EU on this subject for the last 7 or 8 years. They were actually the first market in the world that told us, unless you're able to verify your sustainability, your soy products won't be welcome here. The initial deadline for that was 2015, and that has continued to ratchet up a little bit. But we are seeing sustainability make a difference as shipments go into the EU today. So I think it is more of a market access issue. It's being able to get your foot into the market. I think as we are able to demonstrate, especially as we go forward with greenhouse gas reduction, carbon footprint issues, we may get into the point where US farmers are able to take advantage of that and actually be paid a premium for that. But I think it is certainly having impact. As we watch you see the news headlines about Brazil and the burning of the Amazon, that is getting attention in Europe. And when it will actually spill over to a reduction in demand, we aren't quite sure, but we know it is getting a lot of attention. And so we're trying to focus with a positive message from the US and trying to talk about the differences of US soy production practices versus other origins. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. And Kevin, just a quick response to that, if you may, on your sustainability efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think national corn and really corn growers just across the country in general have been doing a fantastic job at sustainability. And to me, I think that's an interesting word that just doesn't fit in a single box, and you don't. It's very tough to define that from any particular standpoint of what is sustainable on my farm versus the next. So I think we got to be very careful when we move forward with what that particular definition is in trade markets. But I can tell you that when it comes to trend lines of what the American farmer is doing in regards to cover crops and conservation efforts and things like that, we are absolutely headed in the right direction, and I think it's only going to put us in a better competitive position in the marketplace overall. So that definition is tough, but we're doing a lot of the right things to put us in a position long term to make that correct movement.
Well, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Angela now to introduce our next question, and that will be coming from the audience. So Angela, please tell us who we have on deck.
Good morning, everyone. First on deck, we have Pam Johnson. Pam will be joining in just a moment. And we can see you. We just need you to unmute.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. And I think this is so appropriate to be talking about this together and figuring out some solutions. So I'm a farmer and an ag leader. I'm certainly not a trade specialist or an ag economist, but I've been listening to a lot of them this summer discuss trade policy and the ag economy. And what I've learned is that tariffs and retaliatory tariffs are a dead end for the ag economy. They literally snuff out the light at the end of the tunnel that this trade war with China can be resolved. So I think the gut punch that we learned was that the ag economy will not recover as long as we have those 232 tariffs in place on steel and aluminum. And we also learned that this administration has no intention whatsoever of dropping them. So my question is, knowing that, what do we do? And it's not a rhetorical question. I think it's a focus question. Is, this really is the problem that we need to solve with China. So my question to the panel is, can we as ag leaders and ag organizations unite in efforts to remove those 232 tariffs?
All right, who wants to go first on that? Kevin, you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, sure. I absolutely think we can unite. I mean, we've certainly at National Corn been in favor of removal of those tariffs. Since the beginning, I've pushed on that for phase 2 discussions very hard. I think we're all a little bit concerned that phase 2 may not exactly happen, or it's an if or ever type situation. So pushing directly back on those portions of the tariffs is going to be key, and making sure that, as you mentioned, the retaliatory side is what is really holding us back from that. potential, billion-gallon market that Craig talked about there in China. And so, I would say it's definitely encouraging. Like I said, last night is this one of the largest, U.S. corn, or the largest U.S. corn buy ever. So there's some pieces that are still yet, intriguing, I guess, when it comes to especially corn sales to China. But but really, you're 100% correct, Pam. Until we get that off there, when it comes to a potential market of ethanol, especially going in there, and that product specifically, we've got to make sure China jumps back on board of their commitments to ethanol internally and air quality improvements. And I think that'll pressure them on those 232 tariffs.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Pam, for that great question. Angela, let's take another question from the audience. Go ahead and tell me who's up next. I think we have Angela maybe still on mute.
Angela's back in here. While we are pulling up our next participant, I do have one audience question in our Q&A chat box. And this question says, what impact do you see from the current tensions with China regarding concerns about IP theft, internet security, Uyghur detention in Hong Kong? Will these non-trade issues affect the purchases of U.S. agriculture exports, and in particular, soybeans?
That sounds like a great question for Jim.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that question. We certainly see plenty of tensions between the United States and China. And I think all of those kind of pool together to just create a little bit of uncertainty. And we hear it as our boots on the ground, our team in China, they reported to me overnight that the pace of purchases this week is less than it's been the last couple of weeks. And the reason that we see that is because the companies in China that were actively buying U.S. new crop soybeans are just worried about what's going to happen with this sort of closing of consulates, other things being said. They're worried that there could be a disruption in the implementation of the Phase 1 agreement. So certainly that uncertainty is not good for future purchases. And it just causes them to wish they could find an alternative source. Now, we may find that for the next 5 months, the U.S. is the best source, the only large source of soybeans, which is great, but that's not the kind of supplier we want to be. We want to be a supplier that is a supplier of choice when they also have a choice, that they choose us. It's not only we're the last resort. So I think you've raised a great question. Those are concerns. We need to try and build our relationship rather than keep attacking it. Thanks for the question. Over.
Yeah, thank you. Craig, do you have anything to add to that from what you're hearing in terms of ethanol exports?
I guess if I'm trying to take the optimistic view, it seems like sometimes with China, whatever I think should happen doesn't. So maybe on the counter to that, maybe it'll bring more political pressure from the U.S. to China, and hopefully it can maybe help them relieve the 232 tariffs. It's 15% on ethanol that Pam talked about. But to be clear, ethanol has been shut out of China now for 28 months. So we definitely need something to happen there.
Thank you. And Kevin, just a quick question that came in from Bill Thompson on my team. How big is the demand for corn in China yet? Do you expect a lot more purchases yet this year?
Well, I think from what I've been hearing, and I think a lot of you've been seeing or reporting, is that the China stocks are certainly fairly low at the moment versus what they have been in the recent past. And so some encouraging, market dynamics there. But it's always tough to tell what seems to be truth on those numbers and potential stocks in China. So we always kind of take that with a grain of salt. But I absolutely, the corn sale, the recent corn sales that we've had there are really very encouraging. And I think that's a large factor due to price here, though, and what we're seeing with our current pressures in our market internally, as well as was mentioned earlier, the price in China of their own domestic corn is very high. So that difference right there is giving us some opportunities, which will help us help chew through this carryout however we can, and that's just one of those pieces. But historically, we got a long ways to go to make up for some I would say some earlier trade, trade disruptions, I guess we've had early in the year that were kind of slow to get moving. But things are definitely looking up, and we got to keep going.
Thank you, Kevin. Angela, back to you to introduce our next questioner from the audience.
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm really pleased that we have the Honorable Julie Kenny, who is the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture for the great state of Iowa. Julie, welcome.
Great, thanks Angie, and thanks to our panelists for an awesome discussion. Critically important topic to Iowa and Iowa agriculture and our economy. I think I very much appreciated Mary's comment about the critical nature that Iowa plays in the global food supply and everyone's comments related to that. My question is really for the broader panel. What role do you see states playing in helping to promote trade around the world?
Thank you, Julie. It was great to have you with us. Mary, would you like to go ahead and start with that, answering Julie's question, please?
Thanks, and it's great to have you with us, Julie. I'm not sure I've got the perfect answer, but I've been saying this ever since I was been involved in the National Association of Manufacturers and the importance of trade for all manufacturers. I think we have to keep telling our stories. You know, when we do look at Iowa and where we're number 1 and 2, 3 on ag products and on machinery as far as exporters, it's a lot. I mean, we do a lot in the way of exports, and particularly in the ag industry. And I'm not sure the general public realizes it sometimes, and I don't think sometimes our elected officials always understand it as well. So telling our story is so important. And I think, no matter what administration, I had the chance to be on the President's Export Council with President Obama. And that was always one of our things we kept talking about. And I think now it's the same thing. How do we help people understand why trade's important, that it's not a bad word. Trade is good because it actually allows us to increase and grow and for manufacturers, add more jobs. So, this sounds simplistic maybe, but it is telling our story with real data and to the people that we've elected, both at the state level and at the federal level.
Thank you, Mary and Julie. And Brett, I'm going to turn to you to respond to this as well, not so much on the strictly trade front, but in terms of what role you would like to see the state play in enhancing your ability to produce these new value-added products that then we can hopefully export.
Yeah, well, the good news is actually the state is already making some efforts. They've as I mentioned, they have the production tax credit, which is tremendously important because a lot of these products you're going to want to produce them close to where the feedstock is generated. So that's a tremendously useful thing to do. They've also instituted through the Iowa Economic Development Biosciences Initiative effort in bio-based products, where they're providing some support to try to get together the stakeholders so that really the industry, university, and the government is working together to move the technology forward and the innovations forward and to support that innovation ecosystem. And so I would say the state's already doing some very proactive things. Always the challenge, I would say, is realistically, Iowa doesn't have as many resources as some states. And so when they make an initiative, it's sometimes hard for them to make a large commitment to those initiatives. So we just have to be very productive in how we interact with each other. But that's the good news, is Iowa is of the size that we can get all the key players together to have these discussions.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to take out your magic wands a little bit here and tell me that if you could have one thing happen, and I'm going to address this to all the panelists, but I'll start with you, Jim. If you could identify one country and or one sort of effort that the federal government could do to really expand exports, what would that be, or what would it look like, where you could prioritize and say, with my magic wand, I would make this happen first in terms of expanding exports of U.S. commodities? And Jim, can you start with that, please?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. And wow, that's an easy question. Not really, because I think it's always a combination of things. But let me try and just answer it specifically. Some time ago, we were asked by the Foreign Agricultural Service and USDA to comment on things, what could they do to try and improve the trade situation? This is like 8, 9 months ago. And we suggested to them that the US historically has used a GSM program to provide credit to buyers around the world. And we talked about the importance of improving that credit program. It's kind of lost a little bit of favor. For various reasons, for those who were in the trade circles, you understand the pressures it came under. But I think to make that more competitive, that we could use that would be something. And secondly, I think it's been touched on, and this is not one specific country, but it is just to build up to remove the uncertainty that oftentimes today is faced by having the US as a supplier. We've always been able to talk about the reliability and the strength of the US as a trading partner. So we want to make sure we're able to continue to use that positive message.
Thank you. Mary, how about for you? You teed up a lot of different challenges from broadband to infrastructure. What would be at the top of your list to make happen?
As far as exports, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it would have been USMCA, and I'm sure there's still implementation matters that we've got to watch that are happening. But with the top export countries being Canada, Mexico, Japan, and then China, I do think it's staying the course on phase 1 in China. And maybe my dad is wrong, but we were supposed to go with phase 1 from $186 billion exported to China in 2020 to 263 billion. I mean, that's a lot. And I think something like 40 billion in ag products, and Iowa would get a good portion of that. So I think that's still probably the number one.
Thank you. Craig, just quick from you, what's at the top of your priority list? We have Craig there to respond.
You got me. I lost my signal. You find out how good your Wi-Fi signal is in events like this. So it's easy for me. It's China, China, China. I mean, we'd ask for ethanol tariff to be 5%. If there's one thing that can move the needle, whether it's for Mary, if Amir, sell more farm equipment, if it's for Kevin to have a higher price for corn, or probably most importantly, my members to have a higher price for ethanol, it's 5% tariff in China. It's 1 billion plus gallons. That's an easy one.
All right, thank you. Angela, let's bring in another participant for asking a question, please.
Absolutely, Sarah. And you will also note there is a poll going on. So if you haven't had a chance to fill out the poll, those participants in the audience, please do so. We'll summarize those results at the end. Next on deck, I am pleased to have Mark Mueller, who is the ICGA board member and chair of the International Corn Grower Association Export and Grain Trade Committee. Mark, to you.
Thank you very much for having me. I have done some work and travel for the U.S. Grains Council, and among the trips I've taken for them, I was in Mexico right about the time the USMCA was signed. And there was much happiness on the part of the people I met with, and they were buyers of grain and ethanol, and of DDGs and ethanol and grain for livestock feed yards. They were very happy that the U.S. Grains Council or the USMCA got signed. But I heard more than one time in a somewhat humorous fashion that what our president took 2 years to do could have been done in 2 months if he'd stayed out of it. So there is that sentiment that we've been creating problems for ourselves that didn't have to happen. Keeping in mind that we seem to be negotiating using brinksmanship and a win-lose mindset, and I do believe that trade is win-win for everybody involved. What issues are you watching, and what would your organization consider success related to the implementation of the 3 recent trade agreements? We're talking about USMCA, phase 1 with Japan, and phase 1 with China. What would you consider the signs for success for those trade agreements?
So Kevin, would you like to take a stab at answering that one, please?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Mark. Looks like you've been doing a little light reading there in the background, Mark. No, thanks for the question. I think from a USMCA standpoint, there are some concerns I think that that we have to look at too, especially right now with the glyphosate issues that they're talking about, and really delays in approvals of biotech, and some of their issues surrounding biotech approvals and things like that, we need to monitor and continue to look at that. But really, a sign of success from that one would be them lifting the ethanol bans, I guess, if you will, or at least the issues in the three major cities of Mexico City, Monterrey, and Guadalajara. Those are, it's really been shut out. Ethanol has been kind of shut out of those cities, and the mandates that they've talked about and put in place have been, excluded from those arenas. So that would be something I think from a USMCA standpoint that we need to see. And as I mentioned earlier, though, I do think that the biggest thing, you can argue with the way it was negotiated. We all know that trade agreements do take time, and I don't care if that's a re-upping of an agreement or a redoing of it in general. Whether it would have been a couple months or not, is debatable. I think again, all these seem to take much longer than that. But as I said earlier, I think just having that thing hitting the reset button, it should give us a lot of encouragement for good trade relations with Mexico and Canada for a long time moving ahead. On China, the things that I think are signs of success already are certainly the corn exports that are going there, because historically we just haven't had very many direct corn sales to China in the past. So those are definitely encouraging. But we'd say that the 232 tariffs, again, that's something that we got to see for that to really, even though it's out of phase one, but to consider China a success moving forward, and that trade agreement for us as NCGA and the ethanol industry, both those, that was something that we've got to see moving, and for them to be able to actually achieve their commitments that they've mentioned internally in air quality. Lastly, Japan, same thing as the other agreement that is kind of big for us. That was really not opening, I wouldn't say any huge new markets for us, but it certainly helped out the livestock sector, and to see continued exports and bigger exports of the meat, and especially beef and pork for us in Japan, those are definitely going to be signs of success for that in the long run.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for that question. Jim, did you want to chime in on that as well?
Sure. I would just say Kevin did I would agree with his comment on USMCA in terms of just the making sure that those science approvals get, that comes into fruition. Japan, agree on the meat situation. We already, for soy, have open access there, so that's not such an issue for us. But in China, everybody else, it is clearly the big market that we're all have our eye on, because it is such a big importer. And for us, successive implementation of phase one will be actually seeing the sales pace continue, having the kind of environment that the Chinese want to continue to make purchases in, and having them feel like there's a mutually beneficial relationship in place, that they are getting, that they're getting something out of this agreement and we're getting something out of the agreement, because I think that's what will make the agreement last.
Thank you. We're going to turn back to Angela for our next question from the audience. Angela?
Great. And thanks, everyone. We are getting fantastic participation in the Q&A box. So we're going to tee up a few here. The next is from Betsy Gibbon. Says, what does a Biden presidency look like for agriculture when it comes to ethanol, trade, and agriculture as a whole? What does another 4 years look like for agriculture with a Trump presidency?
So Craig, I'm going to throw that your direction first, and then we'll try to get some quick responses from everybody. We're nearing the end of our session, so if you can give me some very crisp responses on a Biden and Trump presidency going forward, please.
Yeah, I think on the Biden presidency, depending on the House and the Senate, much more focus on climate. We think biofuels can be a big part of that. So that's Biden, the Biden side of it. Trump, I think it's going to be more of the same. We're going to have to work close with the administration to try to beat down some of these duties that are out in the market.
Thank you. Mary, how about you next?
It's not that easy to tell for sure, but I agree that I think President Trump will probably stay sort of the course he's on, and he likes to negotiate hard, as we've heard from Secretary Pompeo as well. I mean, just tough negotiation. I think actually President Biden would stay the course with China. I also think he would try to mend the fences with the EU. There's some tension there as well, and maybe start the talks with TPP, which is actually a buffer against China. So I think that would be good. So anyway, interesting times ahead. One little thing I haven't mentioned, which I would make a difference that, if Trump continues as president, I do think we have a real ally for Iowa in Ambassador Branstad. We don't always hear all that much from him, but man, I know he is bullish and dogged for Iowa. He's always thinking soybeans, corn, ethanol. He's always thinking that. So I'm sure he's doing stuff behind the scenes. Probably kind of a difficult line that he's trying to maintain, representing the U.S., but also I think being well respected by the Chinese. So hoping he can continue to do his best even in these next months.
That's a really good point. I know I had a great conversation with him not too long ago. Kevin, we've only got about a minute left, so your perspective on going forward in the presidency.
Yeah, I think very similar comments as Mary on China. I do think you've heard from both sides of the aisle some very poignant remarks when it comes to China and some of the issues that they were trying to address, with early on in this presidency. And I would be, it'd be interesting to see how they would, handle those and tackle those. But, we're going to have to, it's all about accountability, I guess, at the end of the day. So we're going to have to continue to push, agriculture and commodities as key parts of trade. But, at the end of the day, I think it's always tough for us, no matter what administration it is, because whatever trade agreement that you're going to tackle, what do we export a lot of? Well, it is agriculture goods, and whether that's manufactured equipment or corn or soy, the fact is we're darn good at growing these crops and building the equipment, and so we export a lot, and that's going to be what they retaliate on many times. And so that's just things that we've got to deal with. We've got to make our points and talk about again how we create premiums in the marketplace and keep the U.S. products on top of the on top of the heap here.
Thank you. And as Angela mentioned, there's been some polling going on, trying to get some other interaction from our audience here. And Angela, I'd like to turn it over to you to announce the results that we've gotten from those polls.
Great, thank you. Well, you should be able to see this as well, and thanks for those who have participated. As poll number 1 was, as you think about the profitability of your business or farmer operation in the next 2 to 5 years, how important is it to have the U.S. government work to resolve trade disputes and reduce trade barriers? Well, 92% of you said very important. So very small percentage of 1% on the very important, but again, 92%. Clearly, this is a timely topic. And then second question, which of the following actions should be a top priority for the next administration to boost U.S. food and agriculture exports? You were able to choose more than one. Leading the charts here is repeal tariffs and reduce the burden of tariffs at 73%. Number 2 is re-enter the Trans-Pacific Partnership at 41%. Number 3 is negotiate new bilateral trade agreements at 41%. Actually coming in at a tie, negotiate new multilateral trade agreements at 41%. And then finally going into negotiate new sanitary and phytosanitary, those SPS issues or laboring standards at 16%. Finish existing trade negotiations at 34%, a high level of engagement there, and then reinforcing existing trade agreements at 34%. So thanks everyone for participating in this poll. We'll be sure to incorporate these into our final report as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Angela. I appreciate the assist on the poll and also taking the audience questions. And I'd really like to thank everybody for their participation. As we said at the onset and in the video, free trade is really critical to American agriculture. And when AgriPulse has done surveys in recent years, trade was not at the top of the list of some of the concerns. But I think at least in the last 3 years, it has risen much higher in the level of concern. And we want to continue, as you can see from the poll data, continue to make that clear to the White House and to lawmakers that there are a lot of farmers and ranchers, equipment companies, agribusinesses who are very dependent on trade. So with that, I'd like to especially thank AgTalks, and it's been a pleasure serving as your moderator today. I also like to thank the Iowa Soybean Association and Kirk Leeds for hosting today's town hall. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kirk Leeds for some summary comments. Kirk, it's off to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Again, what a really important and fascinating conversation. We've covered a lot of ground today, lots of discussions, a lot of really good questions. As we talked about our new markets, potentially customers, tariffs, barriers to trade, the impact that's having on farmers and the entire supply chain. It's been a really good conversation, a lot of tough issues, not a whole lot of answers, but a lot of good discussion and the importance that we raise these issues through the election that's coming up in the next several months. I'd also like to thank Sarah again for her great job moderating. You always do a great job, Sarah. I certainly appreciate that. To our panelists, they're very well done. It's great to have the wide perspective that we've had on here. To all the questions that have come in, thank you very much for those as well. I'd like to again remind you to thank the sponsors of AgTalks. Those include the Iowa Soybean Association, National Corn Growers Association, National Milk Producers Federation, U.S. Dairy Export Council, Farmers for Free Trade, Corn Refiners Association, Plant-Based Products Council, CAECO ISOM, World Strategies, Fresh Produce Association of Americas, the American Farm Bureau Federation, and the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. Thanks again for making this conversation possible. On behalf of the Iowa Soybean Association, thank you all for participating. As a reminder, the next AgTalks Town Hall will be held in partnership with Minnesota Farm Fest and Minnesota Agri-Growth, and will be held next Wednesday, August 5th from 8:30 to 10 Central Time. And whether you live in Minnesota or not, I encourage you to register for the Minnesota AgTalks Town Hall at www.agtalks.net. Each of these town halls will have a different set of speakers and a great lineup of speakers, I would add. And again, we appreciate your participation today. Stay safe, and let's look forward to expanded trade in the months and years to come. Thank you all very much.